Aisha thought avoiding Zion would make things easier, but she quickly realized it had the opposite effect. For weeks after that afternoon in the hallway, she told herself she would stay away. She stopped visiting Samina's house as often, finding excuses like work or errands to keep her distance. When she did visit, she kept her words short, her tone polite but distant, and her eyes carefully avoided his. Each time she saw him, she felt her heart lurch in a way she couldn't control. Yet she told herself she was doing the right thing. She had to protect boundaries. She had to protect everyone, including herself. Despite her efforts, memories of his words lingered. The quiet intensity in his eyes, the calm certainty in his voice, and the honesty he carried it all refused to leave her mind. She found herself thinking about him in the oddest moments while folding laundry, during quiet walks home, and even in the middle of a meeting at work. She had always been careful with her feelings, never letting them rule her. But this was different. This wasn't a fleeting crush or a passing thought. It was persistent, insistent, and undeniable. Zion, for his part, had become quieter. He didn't tease her like he sometimes did when he was younger, and his laughter was rarer when she was around. She could see the change in him during the brief encounters they had at Samina's house or at family gatherings. There was a seriousness in him now, a restraint that made him appear older than his years. Once, while talking to Samina about something unrelated, Aisha noticed the way Zion lingered at the edge of the room, listening quietly, waiting. She caught his eyes briefly, and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent acknowledgement that he remembered, that he hadn't forgotten. That look made her heart tighten. Time passed, and Aisha convinced herself she was doing the right thing. She was careful not to encourage his feelings, not to respond to the unspoken tension. She told herself that feelings fade if left unspoken. That distance could solve everything, that the heart could be protected if logic took the lead. Yet every day she noticed the quiet spaces he left in her life. A phone call from Samina might include a brief Zion says hi, and her pulse would spike. A chance encounter in the supermarket or park would leave her breathless. No matter how much she tried, her mind returned to that afternoon, to the words he had spoken so honestly and gently. One afternoon she saw Zion again at a bookstore. She had ducked in to grab a gift for a friend, hoping it would be a normal, uneventful trip. She didn't expect him to be there. He looked up from a shelf and froze, just as surprised as she was. His eyes softened immediately, relief washing over his features as he smiled slightly. There was a pause, a quiet that spoke louder than any words could. "Are you still avoiding me?" he asked gently. "I'm not avoiding you," she replied, forcing a steady tone. "You are," he said simply. His voice wasn't angry, just sad. Aisha felt a pang in her chest. He was right. She had been avoiding him. She had distanced herself to feel safe, but the distance had not protected her. It had only made everything more complicated. They stood among shelves of novels, the soft hum of other customers around them, and yet they felt completely alone. Zion's voice was low, calm, respectful. "You think I don't understand the situation? That I don't know what could happen if people knew?" He said. "You're young," she said quietly, trying to remind both of them of the practical boundaries they couldn't cross. "I'm not a child," he said firmly, and his eyes didn't waver. She swallowed. He had grown into a man in so many ways, careful and thoughtful, yet unafraid of truth. She could see him fully now, beyond the boy she had known. And it frightened her because her own feelings had not disappeared. "And you deserve someone who doesn't have to hide," he continued softly. "Someone who isn't afraid." Chest tightened. Those words echoed in her mind because she realized she had been afraid. Afraid to admit that her own heart had been quietly reacting. Afraid to confront feelings that had no easy answer. Afraid to face the consequences if she let herself feel. "I'm trying," she whispered, almost to herself. "I'm trying to do the right thing." He nodded, not pushing, not demanding. He simply listened, his eyes steady, patient, understanding. I just don't want us to lie to ourselves. Not anymore. The bookstore around them seemed to fade. The rustle of pages, the soft chatter of other shoppers, the faint smell of coffee from the nearby cafe, they all disappeared. There was only the quiet tension between them, heavy and real, unspoken yet acknowledged. She could see the man he was becoming, someone responsible, thoughtful, and sincere. Someone who understood the weight of feelings and consequences, yet refused to let that stop him from being honest. Aisha's thoughts were a whirlwind. She wanted to speak, to tell him to stop, to make him go away, but at the same time a part of her ached with longing, with recognition of a connection she could no longer ignore. She realized that distance had not erased her feelings. It had only clarified them. The truth was undeniable. She had noticed him before, more than she had wanted to admit. And his honesty had awakened something she had buried. Zion, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. This can hurt many people. I can't just. Her words faltered under the weight of her own thoughts, under the magnitude of what they both felt. I know, he said simply. That's why I've been waiting. Waiting. The word hung between them like a fragile promise. Waiting for her to acknowledge that her feelings were real, waiting for her to face the quiet truths that neither of them could fully escape. He didn't push, didn't demand, simply gave her space, while making it clear he was not retreating. He respected the lines between them, yet he refused to deny what had been revealed. And that patience, that quiet courage, unsettled her more than any impulsive confession could have. When he finally left, slipping silently between the aisles and out the door, Aisha stood frozen. Her pulse thudded in her chest, her hands trembling. Slightly, the world outside seemed sharper, more vivid. The light coming through the bookstore windows felt brighter, warmer, almost dangerous in the way it illuminated every truth she had tried to ignore. As she walked home, her mind replayed the conversation endlessly. Every word, every glance, every pause carried weight. She realized the avoidance, the distance, the polite refusals had changed nothing. She had felt him in her thoughts every day. His honesty had forced her to confront emotions she had tried to hide. By the time she reached her apartment, she understood something simple and terrifying. Feelings that are honest do not fade just because circumstances make them inconvenient. And the connection she shared with Zion, quiet, patient, unspoken, was one of those feelings. It existed in the spaces between words, in the glances they exchanged, in the tension of shared understanding. It was real. And it was impossible to ignore. She sat on the edge of her bed, exhausted but restless, her thoughts tangled. She realized that avoiding him had not protected her. It had only made the waiting, the longing, more intense. The truth was undeniable now. Their connection existed. It was stronger than she had allowed herself to admit. The soft evening light slipped through her window, casting shadows across her room, mirroring the complicated blend of fear and desire swirling in her chest. She knew that their paths would cross again. She didn't know how or when or under what circumstances. But she did know this. Avoiding Zion had not solved anything. It had only made the heart ache in ways that words could not describe. And deep down, she knew that one day they would have to face this truth again. Whether she was ready or not, the quiet, thoughtful boy she had once known had grown into a man who spoke with honesty and courage. And that honesty had awakened something in a realization that some feelings could not be silenced. No matter how carefully she tried, she closed her eyes and let herself feel it, if only for a moment. The ache, the longing, the weight of the unspoken. It was terrifying, and yet somehow it felt inevitable, because some truths, once revealed, cannot be ignored. Aisha tried to focus on her work after that afternoon at the bookstore, but the truth was, her mind refused to obey her. Every time she sat at her desk, her thoughts drifted to Zion, his calm voice, his steady eyes, the way he had spoken with honesty that afternoon. She tried to tell herself that what they felt was impossible, that circumstances made it wrong, that boundaries existed for a reason. But no argument she could muster seemed strong enough to silence the quiet ache in her chest. It was subtle at first, a quick flutter when his name appeared in conversation, a fleeting memory when she passed a place they had once shared a glance. Then it became a constant hum, impossible to ignore. She realized she had been pretending. For months, pretending that distance would erase feelings that were more than fleeting. Time passed slowly, but the inevitability of life kept moving forward. One afternoon, Samina called her, cheerful as always. "Aisha, guess what? Zion has a job offer. In another city. Can you believe it? He might leave next month." Her heart skipped a beat. Another city, another life. Leaving, the words felt like sudden winter winds blowing through her chest, cold and sharp. She forced a calm tone. "That's wonderful. He deserves it." Smina laughed softly, unaware of the storm she had just stirred. Aisha smiled back, but it felt hollow. She realized then that she had been clinging to time, hoping for a pause that never existed. Hoping that by waiting she could protect herself from the inevitability of choices that demanded courage. That evening, Aisha walked home slowly, the city streets quieting as night fell. The sky stretched in a pale orange, fading into deep purple. She thought about Zion's future, about the city he would go to, the opportunities he would embrace. Was right for him, of course, and yet every step she took felt heavier with the knowledge of what she had been avoiding, what she had been hiding even from herself. She realized that the distance, the polite avoidance, had only made her feelings clearer. There was no denying. It isn't more. She had to decide whether she would continue to hide or face the truth. The next day, she resolved to see him. She arrived at Samina's house under the pretense of picking up a few things Samina had left for her. Zion opened the door looking slightly surprised, almost hesitant, and relief softened his expression when he realized it was her. They stood in the doorway for a moment, quiet, the house humming softly around them. "I heard about the job," Aisha said, keeping her voice steady. "That's wonderful news." He nodded. "Yes, it's a good opportunity. I'm excited, but also, nervous, I suppose." She looked at him, noticing the subtle lines of maturity that had formed on his face, the way he carried himself differently now. There was no trace of the boy who had spoken to her months ago in the hallway. He had grown into a man. And that growth made the feelings she had buried feel even more urgent, impossible to ignore. "I wanted to see you before you leave," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we need to talk." His eyebrows lifted, not in surprise, but in quiet anticipation. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. They moved into the living room, the familiar surroundings holding a quiet intimacy, and Aisha took a deep breath, realizing that she had no more time to hide. She had been holding back, waiting for the right moment, pretending she could protect herself by avoidance, but the truth was that avoidance had not helped. She had felt him in every quiet moment, and now, faced with the possibility of his leaving, she could no longer ignore it. "I tried to ignore this," she said finally, her eyes meeting his. "I told myself it was wrong to even think about it. But I can't anymore. I can't pretend that I feel nothing." He remained still, silent, listening, the calm steadiness of his presence giving her courage. "I don't know what the future looks like," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what's right or safe. But I know I can't let you leave thinking I felt nothing." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken feelings hovering between them. Then he spoke softly. "I didn't need promises. I just needed truth." His words, simple yet profound, cut through all the fear and hesitation that had filled the months of distance. She realized that he had never sought to rush her, to demand her feelings, or to pressure her. He had only sought honesty, the clarity of truth. And that clarity had the power to dismantle all the walls she had built to protect herself. "I've been afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "Afraid of what people would think. Afraid of the complications. Afraid of losing everything that matters." He reached out, not in a gesture of possession, but of quiet reassurance. "We can't control everything," he said gently, "but we can be honest. And honesty is stronger than fear." The room felt smaller, warmer, suffused with a tension that was not uncomfortable, but electric in its own quiet way. Aisha felt a shiver run through her. She remembered the afternoon when he had first confessed. The words that had made her heart pound, the certainty in his voice. And now, months later, faced with the possibility of him leaving, she realized that the feelings she had tried to bury had only grown. Distance had clarified, not diminished them. "I never wanted to cause trouble," Zion continued softly. "I just didn't want to lie to myself." She nodded, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Neither did I," she admitted. "They were not reckless, nor were they naive. They were honest. And in that honesty, a fragile, beautiful connection had grown quietly, persistently, without intention, without harm, without the need for dramatic gestures. It was simply real." Aisha felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, replaced by a different kind of intensity, a recognition of the connection that had been present all along. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her voice soft. "But I know I don't want you to leave without knowing how I feel." His gaze softened, and for the first time in months, he smiled fully. Not a polite smile, but a true one. "I don't need you to decide everything now," he said. "I just need the truth. That's enough." She let herself exhale for the first time in weeks. Just truth. And sometimes that was all that mattered. They could navigate the complications, the consequences, the careful boundaries later. For now, they had acknowledgement. They had honesty. And in that honesty, a quiet, undeniable connection had been allowed to breathe. The sunlight from the windows shifted, casting long shadows across the floor, marking the passage of time in gentle streaks of warmth. Aisha felt a strange, beautiful peace. The tension that had haunted her for months softened into clarity. The connection between them, delicate yet strong, had been recognized, named, and allowed to exist, even in the complexity of the world. Around them, she realized that some feelings do not begin with fireworks. Some feelings do not need dramatic declarations or immediate resolution. Sometimes they begin quietly, persistently. With honesty spoken softly in a familiar room, they talked for hours that day, not about the future, not about what would happen, but about the simple truths they could acknowledge. Laughter emerged, tentative at first, then easier, lighter. They shared memories, small stories. The comfort of familiarity that had always existed but had been shadowed by unspoken feelings, replaced by a cautious hope, fragile but undeniable. The evening came, and shadows lengthened further, painting the room in gold and violet hues. They walked to the doorway together, lingering, neither wanting to leave nor force the moment to end. Aisha realized that the strongest part of this connection was its patience, its quiet insistence that truth matters more than fear. She had thought the only way to protect herself was to hide, to avoid, to ignore. But in that quiet acknowledgement, she understood that honesty, even when complicated, could offer freedom. "I'm glad you came," Zion said softly, his hand brushing lightly against hers in farewell. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, not possession, and it carried the weight of months of waiting and understanding. She smiled, her heart full and anxious at the same time. "So am I," she replied, as she watched him walk down the street. Disappearing into the early evening, she felt a strange mix of longing and relief. There were challenges ahead, yes, complications they could not ignore, and the world would not be simple. But she had faced the truth. She had recognized her feelings. She had allowed herself to feel without guilt or pretense. And that, she realized, was the beginning of something real. Sometimes love begins not with grand gestures, but with small moments of honesty. Sometimes it begins quietly in the sunlight of an ordinary room, in a conversation that neither rushes nor demands, in the acknowledgement of feelings long ignored. And sometimes the words you never forget are the ones that finally set you free.